Hello everyone and welcome to another used tech hustle graphics card review. In this one we're going to be taking a look at the Palette GTX670 with 2GB of RAM. In my never-ending search for bargain graphics cards I managed to pick this one up from eBay for about £25, and I got to admit it was something I wasn't expecting to get so cheap, as I'd heard only good things, but we're going to see for ourselves exactly what this thing's like in 2019. This particular card from Palette was released way back in 2012, and at the time the manufacturer's recommended price was a whopping £330, but considering this was one of the higher end cards in the 600 series, I suppose that's to be expected. As you'd expect from a card of this class, it offers a DisplayPort, HDMI port and twin DVI outputs. Now for those interested in a bit more of the specification, this particular model had 2GB of GDDR5, the clock speed was 915 MHz with a boost of up to 980 MHz. The RAM speed was 3004 MHz, obviously in dual channel that will double up. The maximum resolution this could achieve was 4096 by 2160. The power draw, being quite a hungry beast, was 170 watts, meaning the minimum PSU was 500 watts. And if you are looking at getting one of these, you will need at least a 6-pin connector as well. Now, although I managed to pick mine up for a very reasonable price at auction on eBay, it did arrive quite dusty, so the first thing I did was disassemble it to give it a thorough clean, as well as apply some more thermal paste. Now the one thing I should point out, as with all my reviews, I don't tend to overclock them unless it's a very old card, or at least give it a chance. This one I left at standard stock speed, so if you're into that kind of thing, you could just as easily set up MSI Afterburner and boost it a little bit further. However, as you're about to see, I don't think that's really needed unless you want to really push things, as I was very impressed of what this thing could do out of the box anyway. Once it was all spick and span, I decided to fire up my X58 system and pop this in, and yeah, it's time to sit back and see what this can do with some games. As always, we're looking at some older games, some newer ones, just give you a general idea of what you can expect from this thing in 2019. We're going to kick things off with Subnautica. Now I used a mixture of high and medium settings with a few lows thrown in there, and I was able to get an average of 73 frames a second. Now this particular game is very beautiful, and if you manage to get it run smoothly then it's all the better, and as you can see, with very good averages of 73 frames a second, this was definitely playable, and for the first game I tried, very impressive indeed. Next up, given how well Subnautica had run, I decided to try something a lot more modern in the form of Apex Legends, and yep, with medium to low settings, this was a very playable average of 60 frames a second, with a quite stable set of 1% and 0.1% lows, as you can see. So if you're looking even for later titles like this card will easily do it in its sleep. You could even push things further with an overclock, of course. Next up, if we take a look at Rise of the Tomb Raider, this thing I was able to push it up to the high preset, and as you can see, very stable average of just under 48 frames a second with very respectable 1% and 0.1% lows. Though this game is maybe getting a bit long in the tooth, the card is as well, so I was quite surprised to see exactly how well this can perform, and well, you may be able to see a bit of a trend in how these games are running on this pretty old bit of hardware. Now, as much as I would have loved to bring you footage of the Division 2, my budget simply will not allow me to buy it, so we're going to have to stick with Division 1, but I think that's going to be quite representative anyway. On high settings, we managed to get an average of 40 frames a second. Although the lows may look a bit troublesome to you, it felt very smooth to play, and yeah, this is one game I certainly enjoy playing, and if you're looking to play similar titles on an older piece of hardware, the 670 will be able to do this with no problem at all. Next up, we're going to take a look at one of the more graphically intense games of recent years, in Project Cars 2. On medium settings, this thing ran an absolute dream, and the average was just over 80 frames a second with incredibly solid 1% and 0.1% lows as well, as you can see. This thing is blowing my mind already. I was not expecting this kind of performance. Okay, so this one might be one of my own personal favourites, but I do love testing it because it really brings out the worst in PCs and graphics cards. But this one, not a problem at all. With City Skylines I was able to average around about 44 frames a second with very solid lows, but this game is a bit CPU heavy, so the 0.1% lows do drop a little. Now, although it's not one of my own personal favourites, I don't play it an awful lot, I do like to test CSGO to see how it'll run, and unsurprisingly, given how you've seen things run so far, this card absolutely ate this thing for breakfast. The average of 132 frames a second meant this was very playable and very fluid. Next up we've got PUBG, and as much as I really don't like this game anymore, I did decide to test it, although the footage you are seeing is from another card as I did lose it. As you can see on medium settings, we're getting a very respectable average of 72 frames a second, with fairly decent lows on that as well. So if you're into this game still, and you're looking to push a PC out on a budget with a card like this, go for it. It will handle it with no problem. Unsurprisingly, given how you've seen it perform so far as well, Fortnite ran on high settings at a very nice frame rate of 53.5 frames a second. You could drop the settings down a bit to push this even further or overclock the card, as I've said, but straight out of the box, with no fuss, this thing ran it like a dream. Although I'd love to bring any footage of Battlefield 5, unfortunately I don't have it, so Battlefield 1 will have to do. And on medium settings, this thing was a very smooth 46.5 frames a second, with solid lows of 30.3 and 24.5, as you can see on screen. Very playable indeed. Moving on, we've got GTA 5 up next, and with settings mixed between medium and high, we were able to get an average of 67.1 frames a second. The lows are still very solid, around about the mid-30s, and playable, well, yep, it certainly was on this really old bit of hardware. I'll definitely say, so far, this thing is shaping up to be an absolute sweet deal if you can get it for a good price. Now we're moving on to a not very popular title, but certainly one that I found really pushes hardware these days, maybe because it's not very well optimised. Mafia 3 on media settings was a nice and smooth 41.4 frames a second. And again, you could drop this down if this was a problem to you, but certainly coming from a console gamer's point of view, this was very smooth, very playable, and I really quite like the game. Last up, we'll take a look at Crysis 2 on Ultra settings, and unsurprisingly, given this thing is a powerhouse, it ran it very smoothly indeed. Although the lows may look a bit concerning to you, it didn't translate to the actual gameplay, so if you're looking to play this old game, this thing will do it, no problem. So there it is, that's my little review of the GTX670 in 2019. Now I suppose the question here is, would I recommend it? And the answer to that would be yes, absolutely, but only if you can score it at a good price. Now I managed to get mine at auction, which I don't usually do, and I managed to get it for £25 plus £3 for postage, bringing it around about £30, which I think it was a fantastic deal. However, taking a look at eBay, if you sort from buy it now from lowest price, you can see the starting price is around about 50, and the same is true if you're looking at sites like CEX. So it really does depend on whether or not you can score that deal. So I suppose the thing to take away is, if you can get this for anywhere between £30–40, brilliant, fantastic value, very impressive even to this day and age, so long as you've got a power supply to handle it. However, if it's pushing things up to maybe £60 or more, walk away, you can get better value in this day and age. Anyway, that's enough from me. If you've enjoyed this video, then do check out the others on my channel. I do have plenty of reviews of GPUs, cases and so on, as well as all kinds of cool tech stuff you may enjoy. If you have enjoyed it, then do drop a like, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments if you've got something to say. Other than that, thanks for watching guys, and keep hustling.